The Angolan Civil War. Angola is a country on the southwest African borders. Having tons of fauna and flora, such as the African beach plant, or wild foxes. Having arid landscapes, such as savannas and rainforest. In 1575, Portuguese colonist, Paulo Dias de Novaes, and his 400 soldiers, colonized Angola, and was officially conquered in 1605, making the capital, Luanda. Portuguese colonists over the years mainly used this place for extracting oil, iron, diamonds, and slave trade. This made Portugal an economical superpower at the time. In 1761, slavery was officially abolished in Portugal. So, Portugal had to use its allies as fundamental resources at the time. America was one of them, since they still haven't abolished slavery. In 1861, a war was on the rise, as native Angolas were in distress of how the Portuguese were treating them. The natives did rioting and slave raids, in order to counteract this problem. In 1961, the Portuguese colonial war started. It was fought having 8,289 Portuguese fatalities, 30,000 Angolan casualties, and having 4,000 wounded, and a total of 50,000 civilian casualties. In the beginning of the war, there was a total of 40,000 to 60,000 Angolan fighters. Other countries who were involved as well, such as New Guinea, had 10,000. And in Mozambique, had 15,000 fighters. Portugal towered these combined armed offensives, with a whopping 148,000 active fighters in the region. In each province that Portugal had occupied, African nationalist groups were being formed, with only one goal: to gain its independence from Portugal. There are 7 African nationalist groups. But here are the biggest groups: the MPLA, People's Movement for the Liberation of Angola; the FNLA, the National Front for the Liberation of Angola; and the UNITA, National Union for the Total Independence for the Total Liberation of Angola. Other countries were involved as well. The Soviet Union was a key factor in the war. The USSR tried everything to make their influence on other countries, which later on will result into the Cold War, getting Angola involved in it. The Soviet Union took this great opportunity. Russian president talked down to the Angolan president and wanted him, Nikita Khrushchev, to sign off on the Western foreign policy. This policy would promise partial military assistance during the war, then after the war, Angola would permanently convert to socialism. If the war was going to be won, the USA would sign off their Declaration of Independence in order to get recognized by other countries. Other belligerents helped out in the war effort, such as China, helping Angola's economical crisis. By doing this, Angola is the second best trading partner with China. The Republic of Congo supported the nationalist groups militarily by selling guns, tanks, and even Congoan soldiers. This includes other African nations who helped but didn't want to get involved into the war, such as Cuba, Zaire, Algeria, Tunisia, Tanzania, Senegal, Guinea, Egypt, Bulgaria, and Brazil. The war soon ended in 1974, after a coup d'état in Portugal, and a soon change in government and elections. Angolan fighters were on the rise, finishing off the Portuguese regime. The main nationalist group that really pivoted the war to victory was the MPLA, and African rebel leader Jonas Savimbi. Jonas was praised and most liked around his neighboring countries for his heroic actions, even saying his famous words, recognized by most people: "Death to the MPLA." This quote got even recognized by the gaming series of Call of Duty Black Ops 2, where Jonas Savimbi was placed in the game. Activision even got a lawsuit for putting him in the game, but it didn't go through due to the lack of information. Portugal redirected itself from its former government type, from being a dictatorship to a democratic republic of unitary of state. The war soon started a year later after independence from Portugal, as Portuguese troops occupy the southwestern African borders, when Angola converted to socialism. The Cold War started, stretching relation between the Soviet Union and the United States of America, resulting in the Angolan Civil War. The Russians' plans to convert the neighboring countries to communism was kosher to them. The Soviets wanted the Angolan nationalist group, the MPLA, to join the Marcos organization. Other groups refused to join the organization, as they weren't naive enough to get involved with these powerful nations, even fighting their own allies, the MPLA, to stop the outlandish depictions that they were making. Putting Angola in the Cold War would jeopardize their independence. The MPLA was at war with Flickr and UNITA. The MPLA believed that there is a strategy to change the world, and this was one of them. The UNITA wanted a fair and stable government, since no one really was the Prime Minister, President, nor Queen or King of this country. These nationalist groups went full on conquest and conquer. These nationalist groups became power-hungry. The USA declined their independence partially because Angola was working with the bad guys. This resulted in a proxy war, using hit-and-run tactics, and guerrilla warfare. The UNITA was outnumbered in weapons, and in military support. Angola was being heavily supplied by the USSR. Even the MPLA was allowed to train their troops in Moscow, using Russian training tactics. Here is a list of countries who supported the MPLA directly. The MPLA was given small firearms, such as the Makarov PM, semi-automatic pistol, 8-round mag, Tukhov-33, and the Stechkin APS. Supplied by the Russians. Submachine guns, such as Star Z-45 from the UK, the Uzi from Israel, and the Scorpion from Czechoslovakia. Assault rifles, such as the AK-47, 7.62 by 39 Brabham round from the Russians, AKM from the Russians, Iwatava from Israel. Machine guns all from the Russians, such as the RPG 7.62 by 39 mm round, the RP-46, and the PKM. The MPLA only has one tank brigade, having only T-55s from the Russians. About 267 were given. T-62s, about 50 were given, and T-72s, about 50 were given. Armored fighting vehicles, all supplied by the Soviets. The BMP-1, 150 were given, BMP-2, 62 were given, BMP-3, only 35 were given, including 153 armored personnel carriers, from the Soviets and Brazil, 150 armored scout vehicles, and 45 mine-resistant ambush-protected vehicles, from China. The USA wanted to counteract this problem by allowing the United Nations for Portuguese troops to liberate Angola. France did the part by getting South Africa and Mozambique in the war. South Africa sent 10,000 troops to the front lines, and Mozambique sent 15,000 troops to the front line. The USA in return gave South African $15 million a year. But still they were greatly outnumbered when the Cubans came. The MPLA was all about heroism, the freedom of all Angolan, regardless of ethnicity. The MPLA did promise total independence soon, but lied. The MPLA abandoned Marxism and Leninism, morphing into a power-hungry capitalist, wanting to surrogate the battleground. The MPLA was the root of all problems with Angola. Fidel Castro wanted to pursue Jonas Savimbi's heinous beliefs by also helping him militarily, sending 10,000 troops over to the MPLA. Fidel Castro and Jonas Savimbi were now the two most wanted men in the world at the time. This Cuban intervention resulted in the Battle of Solana Vale, which South African fighters put a real dent into the enemy lines. Jonas Savimbi had over a dozen assassination attempts, other than his competing partner, Castro. Even 4 unidentified aircraft bombarded a nearby village he was staying in. Obviously this assassination attempt was unsuccessful. Jonas used to be a pretty cool guy, but now he has turned sour on his great nation. He was an evil man. He ordered his troops the killing of civilians, and his high-ranking officers. Even burning people and accusing them of being witches. Even lying about his ignorance, as a simple form of misinformation. Jonas was on the run of full-on totalitarianism. Eventually, the Cold War was going on to an end. Cuba and South Africa had to sign a peace treaty, as Cuba had to withdraw his troops from Angola. The Soviet Union's empire collapsed to its former borders. Unfortunately, the MPLA won the Angolan Civil War. But the Portuguese are still trying to fight off the African rebels. Jonas Savimbi died in 1992, being shot 8 times and killed in his birthplace. In the town of Moxico, in total, there was over 150,000 casualties, and over 500,000 civilian casualties. The war ended in 2002, but there is still armed conflict happening today. Anyways, thanks for watching this cool, small, summarized documentary.
Bora! Já cai. Bora. Aumentamos o botão? Empurra só. Bora pra trás, pra trás. Quando o pneu.